program on the chronology of Ute Rock Art, starting with the Archaic and informative, then the religious aspects of Ute Rock Art, the mythology, then the trails, the maps, and stuff that we find in the rock art. And what, I don't know, Clifford wants to fill in on the spirituality aspect, the stories and myths and metaphoric meanings of some of the iconography. So I don't know how to really, we're going to kind of jump around. It's a deep subject, so it's hard to just brush by it with pictures without a good explanation. So we're going to ad-lib, right? Kind of. Let's start with some of the beginning. I'm just going to show the basic map of tribal territories are here. And so we're up in the Uncompahgre area. But we're going to be talking about the Tabawatchi area, the Uncompahgre Plateau for this presentation. Next slide. I kind of wanted to show you how they overlap, where the colors mix in a little bit, because they didn't really have hard definitions of territories, but they centered around a sacred mountain or high place that they used for orientation as to where their band roamed around. Next slide. So you have this group of archaic, and then formative, and then historic. And let me just give you an idea of how the styles change through time. Next slide. These are called archaic. We call them archaic because they have these long, spindly legs. They're very faint on the petroglyphs. Clifford, do you want to sit just right there? If you want to sit, if you want to stand, that's good. And then big bodies and big branching horns. Next slide. Just hit it and it should fade in. To this one, it's similar. It's at another site, but again, you can see the long legs and the big body. Next slide. Humans look sort of like this. Big hands, very wispy looking. And this is all from this period. The animals, you can see the hunters have arm gestures for driving the animals. The animals are still in this style. This is at Escalante Bridge on the plateau. And right around the corner from it is a hunter with his atlatl. And the atlatls are from the Archaic period. Now, about 500 AD, next slide, the animals change. They get little roundy bodies, short legs, and the bow and arrow comes into play. You see the man again with a driving gesture, but he's got a bow this time, bow and arrow. So we say that's during the formative era. In this panel, you have the proto-historic or historic Ute coming in on top of the older archaic images that were there. And then the late historic, where you actually even have maybe a portrait of Colero with his top hat and his peace medallion, and of course the horse. So trails were really important to the Ute. Next slide. And we have Mythology by Dr. Goss that talks about in the beginning when Water Grandmother, you can all read it, I guess, floated in her basket in the midst of the water. She thought and created the land from her home body. She thought and sang and stretched the land. She circled in a sunwise direction, which is really important. And bit by bit she added to the land. When the land was so large she could no longer see the water, she sent Sinawave to see it if it was large enough. He ran from center to edge again and again, checking and rechecking. Finally he said, out of breath, "It fits, it fits." And this has to do with the trails that are so important to the Utes that tie everything together. It allows them to navigate the country for resources and so on. Next slide. So only Sinawave had the power to make the trails or to measure the earth. And he made the trails from the mountain center of the earth to the edges where the earth meets the sea and surrounds us. This is all from Jim Goss. Next slide. So when we find a little line like this, when I do, to me, I have to investigate it in this context of a trail. Next slide. Because of this little dot up here, it's very important. And it's different than a bullet hole or anything else. And Clifford says, when you see a map, you take it and you transpose it on the landscape oriented to the south. And it will show you, it works as a map. So if I take this long line and I look face to the south, away from the panel, there will be something in the landscape that this represents, and something that that hole represents. Next slide. And you see that the hole is packed all the way around it and has these dots that come up and do kind of a puddle out to the side. So it gives me an idea of what this might be representing. Next slide. So I look to the south, and Clifford says the whole panel is the view that you see, and that line runs down about eye level, just below your eye level. So next slide. There's something that's running along. Next slide. That goes along. Next slide. And ends in a wet spot. Okay, so there's a spring there. Next slide. And the spring is actually an aquifer that fills up and has about a 6-inch little spout of water that comes out. And the ranchers tell me that it's the only sweet water in that whole valley. The rest is too alkaline to drink. And it's located right at the foot of these panels up on Chavano, in the area of Chavano. So the panel itself is actually talking about what's at the end of that ridge where there's a spring. Next slide. So the Utes had a way of mapping their whole country out there. This is the Uncompahgre Plateau looking towards the La Salle Mountains. Next slide. And at Chavano, there's the bare panel, but Clifford always told me that this image here represented a map.
There we go.
Go ahead. Go forward.
No.
And so there you see it. So I compared it to a map of the Uncompahgre Plateau, and it looks like this. But Clifford told me that the Utes are oriented to the south, as we've been talking about. So the south would be that end. Next slide. So we turn this around. Next slide. Turn it around. Next slide. So that the south is here, and the south on our map is matched up, and the north in the north. Now we see something that's very convincing. These circles here are represented here, these basins. This is the Rubidoux Canyon Creek that comes down. This is called Dry Fork that goes up that way, comes down this way. And the Uncompahgre River on that side is over there where that red dot is. Next slide. So even if you just had a map with the topograph, the landforms, it matches up incredibly well. Next slide. I even stuck it on top of the map. And this is Oak Hill that I've ridden around. I rode all the way into here and into these basins. Are huge, but they're there. And a woman at the BLM that works on cattle ranges says, these are all grazing allotments, and she knows every trail that goes across back over to Dry Creek that she used to run cattle to when she was a child with her dad. So that's pretty impressive. The Utes were good. Next slide. So I tried another map. This is in Smith Fork. This is at just on the side of the hill, and it's facing sort of south. Next slide. So I took it, and I want you to notice that the markings through it do not follow the natural cracks in the rock like normal rock art usually does. They usually utilize something. It's gone across the grain of the rock for a specific reason. And then it has these things offshooting of it. So I took a map of the Gunnison River, which the Smith Fork runs into, to the south of it. I traced this. That's what the lines in the rock look like. Next slide. Turned it upside down. Okay, and here's a map of the Gunnison Canyon, and Smith Fork goes out that way. There's a Ute Trail. It's called the Ute Trail, comes in here. Another one here they call the Duncan Trail. The highway goes up and around that way, but next slide. That's what it looks like if you just lay it right on top, no stretching. I tied in the line that it's in the petroglyph with the Ute Trail and matched up those two holes up there where there's two little knobs on the landscape. But it follows this natural line of the Gunnison Gorge and into the Smith Fork. And then more trails we don't even know are there. This is all BLM and Forest Service. We don't know if there's old trails in there. We do have a trail that runs along the rim, and we do have these we've utilized to come in to this NCA area that's now, yes.
I hope I'm not interrupting. It took me a minute to catch on, and I think you're telling us that where our modern convention is always have north at the top of our rectangular maps, the Ute convention was to have south at the top of the map.
Same with the Pueblo and a lot of other cultures. It's not in their head to have north. They're faced to the south because that's where the sun comes from. They're always facing south. So I have more maps, but I don't get into them because we haven't done a flyover and checked it yet. Yeah?
Just step back a second. I was wondering, where did the Fremont culture fit into the Archaic?
They are of the formative era because of the corn. They kind of bridge it. They're formative era. We just call it Fremont era because we don't know what people they were, but it's of that era. So, just a little bit more before I turn it over to Clifford. Next slide. The horse comes in and changes a lot of things. And the Paiutes rejected the horse because it's such an economic burden on them. They like the canyon country and the dry desert areas where horses were very hard to keep or to support, whereas the Utes in the mountains picked up on them right away because it allowed them greater mobility and they were able to support them. Next slide. But in one area, in Leonard Basin, which is in the plateau, the evolution of the horse, and this is really important, first, like in the 1700s, when they were first seeing the horse from the Spanish and trading coming back and forth, they're just describing it, an animal, 4 legs, short. Then about the 1830s when they started trading for the horse, they're showing it with riders and trading expeditions. In about the 1860s, they get more elaborate with the horse where they're describing how they understand the horse rather than realistic depictions. It's more about grace and speed, elongated necks, bragging about their ponies and races and racetracks. So you get a lot of this stylization with longer necks, shorter legs, how you understand it, not how you see it. When you're ever on a horseback, how does it look to you? Does it look like it's all neck and little legs? That's what they're trying to describe. But by the 1890s, they're getting very expedient. It's just 2 legs instead of 4, and a lot of stick animals become that way too, just 2 legs instead of 4, and scratching instead of pecking. Next slide. This is the area where these petroglyphs are found. It's called Leonard Basin. And again, next slide. We're getting into storytelling where animals are representing the movements. This is a rabbit hunt with a big stick. Next slide. It shows them coming over the hill with their horses and hunting them and nabbing them and knocking them over the hill, bagging the rabbits. So we're getting narratives and stories within the panels. Next slide. Okay, now we're to the spiritual realm. We're getting into the bear dance, the tree, and this is all shown at Chavano Petroglyph Park. Next slide. In this panel, we have a bear coming out of a cave, and it's a rock incorporation with a little crevice right there that the bear steps come up to the bear comes up to the tree. And there's 3 eras here. There's Archaic, where you have this light line coming up, which is the very first time this panel was packed. And you see the little person up here with a digging stick and a burden basket. That context tells you this is a line, this is a trail. One of the first trails coming out of the valley, going across and forking off in this direction for gathering food and roots and herbs and stuff up on the plateau. The next episode is, so this one is Archaic, this one is formative or proto-historic. And the bear is much brighter, and the bear up there is of the same era. Bear comes up to the tree, and he's shown diagrammatically up top. The third era is this much later expedient, roughly pecked one that's later than that. So there's 3 eras here. That's one thing that I teach in recording, to distinguish that. Next slide. So I think we want to talk about the bear and the tree, and the story you probably all know of the young man who saw a bear walking up to a tree and doing a little dance, singing a little song. And he takes that back to his village to discuss an explanation for all that, and the people celebrate this whole episode by doing the bear dance. Next slide. So we have this image over and over again with the bear and the tree. Next slide. But I just want to show you this last bit about this bear, who's important, because most people would draw it like this, but what's missing are these little details with the dots around the feet and the dots around the mouth. And in the early days, in the 30s, it was observed that the Utes would put red paint in their mouth and let it drool out the sides to emphasize the veracity of the bear. And it's through that bear power that doctoring can evoke that bear medicine for doctoring in the bear dance. And that's why it's portrayed that way, because you need a very strong bear to pull on during a bear dance ceremony, not a wimpy bear. Anyway. Do you want to talk about the bear dance now? Okay. Go for it.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First of all, the Utes, we refer to them as Utica, were here many years ago, and they were in different groups. So we do not look at Ute as being just one group of people, because there were a group here and a group there, and they all had different names to them groups. I was explaining to my friend here, Carol, that my mother, her people lived in this area, and they referred to them as Yampatika. Yampatika is referring to a plant, Yampa plant, that those that use that in their diet. That's what that means. And to the south we had the Daviwatch. They were more to the east. And further south there's Mowatch and Kapota Women and other groups that were there. And next to the Uncompahgre in Colorado River area were the Barrianos. These were another group. Similar in their language and some of their beliefs, like how they believed in bear dance and ceremonies that they had at that time. And in talking about bear dance now, we can get to that now. And, when I was a boy, my mother would be explaining that to us like in February or March. You hear a thunder, and this is wintertime, but you have that change in the weather. So you hear the thunder rolling. And then our parents would tell us that it's a noise or it's something that is telling us about the bear is rolling over in the den. Like in their hibernation, they're rolling over. And it's getting close to spring. So the Indian people in that area would be thinking about having a bear dance then, at that point. And these men that usually perform that, or people that head that, know who's going to be in charge of that spring celebration. There would be lightning, there'd be thunder, and all of that is classified as being close to nature. And you will, in your studies, find that Native Americans were more like followers of whatever nature taught them, because that was the only thing that was there. There was no institution that talked about, high-tech stuff or anything like that. And to know more about what you lived was important. So they knew about when the weather would change. They keep track of the sunrise. They can tell when it's like winter solstice and summer and equinox. They know when these time is going to be there. And based on that, then all things like nature is actually following that too. And the idea was this, that energy from a certain time of the year and day comes directly into this earth. Like maybe now you can look at it this way. If you are a person that has grapes, let's put it that way, grapes, a vineyard, and you are going to use that to make wine. Later you're going to find out at a certain time there's the best time to do all of like harvesting and that, because the energy gave that a little different body. Everything is like that. And plants that we eat here are not same. And one has to know when is the best time to collect that. And they would follow that. That's what I was talking about when I said nature. Nature is actually leading their entire life. When the spring finally gets to this place, grass is going to appear, then the snow is melting, and that's a time for the bear dance. So the bear dance is like collecting all the people and put them in one place, and they're going to have a dance. The dance is a back and forth dance. When I was a boy, they didn't call it bear dance. There was no such a thing as a bear dance. I heard bear dance, the word itself, when I went to school. They told me it was a bear dance, but I learned it as a mamakonakap. Mamakotwi. That's how I learned it. And it has nothing to do with bear. It means back and forth dance. That's what that meant. And all my people use that word mamakonakai instead of bear dance. So where the name came from, I don't know. But then they associated bear with that again. The bear is a power animal. Like if you take a bear, springtime, they're bringing with them the energy. And there are very few people that actually believed in that. They were somewhat like shamans, medicine men. They don't, it was something that you don't just get that through a workshop. There's no such thing as workshop. You were born into that. And when you're born into that, you start from day one. When you're a little baby, your parent pushes you to that. And that's how that began. So when you are close to a bear animal, you know what they're for. And all other animals are the same way. Not only in bear dance, but in like most of our ceremonies we have, like we just got through with a 4th of July powwow at home. And you had a lot of dancers there. And dancing is jumping up and down. And you keep in time with the drum. Okay, that's how you would see that. Because you don't know what's going on. And to those people that are trained or have been brought up that way, each dancer is telling a story. And when they tell the story, a person that watches that person dance will follow that. Like you take a step, creeping step, bouncing, like that. Down, crouch, you say, "Did you see something?" Or then you lift up, you are peeking through under the feathers. You see the enemy. You make your move toward that to the side. So this person that's dancing is doing that. You follow that story. And it's got to be in the rhythm of that drum. And that's how you watch powwow. Bear dance, same way. You move up and down. And it's back and forth. The sound that you hear is a growling sound. And they have this little stick that's notched. And they rub a bone over that, making that growling noise. And they're dancing to that sound. And the spirit is coming from that, from the song itself. And if you understand Ute now, some of the songs are not really sacred. Like, I grew up with it, so I listen to the songs. Some are comical. Like, some songs will say, "You're dancing too slow. Pick it up." That's what they're saying. And, in fact, there's one song that talked about a white person sitting in the car and watching the bear dance and laughing at the same time. That's what that song says. That was back in the 30s that song came into the ceremonial circle. But he was talking about Bureau of Indian Affairs employees that had brand new Model Ts that sit in the car. And they would come there and they watch. The Indians had horses and wagons. That's why they sing about this car that's sitting out there. Rhythm goes up and down like that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I don't feel like Karu. I don't feel like Karu. That was a song. And when they sing that, people start laughing. That is fun. But that's part of that ceremony. Circle is always there, a big circle. Circle of life. You have entrance to the east. And the singing group, they're sitting on the west side of the, within a circle. Men on the west side, women on the east side. It's a women's choice. Women control that dance as far as selecting their partners. And on the third night, third day, third night, they have an all-night ceremony. All-night ceremony, this is dancing back and forth all night. In the morning, before the sun rose, they would line up all the people. And they would have a medicine man or shaman that prays for each one of them. They use an eagle wing to bless each individual. And they would start from the south side and they go north. All of them, that's there. And then when they complete that, then they go home. And then when they get home, then the man of that household would do the same thing with their family. The family would line up outside, and this is the time that the gentleman of the house is talking to all things that's within that area where they live. We are now open to like conversing with the bugs, the snakes, whatever, that crawls on the earth. And we talk to those, every little thing that's there. And we make a relationship. We say, we're going to live with you. You live with us. You teach me how to live. I will follow you. And don't bother us. Do not harm us. And that's how they were. It was a sacred dance in that way too. And that's the old way of looking at bear dance. Today, we don't have that. We don't have that part where they do that ritual of blessing each individual. We don't have that anymore. It's more of a social gathering nowadays. And that's part of our ways today. But that's bear dance. In our rock art now, you have a bear. Bear is symbolic in the way that it represents a Ute. Okay, that's a Ute. If there's a bear paw is a Ute symbol. You see paw, bear paw, down or up. If there's nothing in that, that means that there's bears around. If there's a round dot in that palm, that means there's so many bears been killed in that area. And that's what that means. A bear is somewhat caretaker of some of our beliefs, like sacred pipes, for instance. And in one picture, it shows a bear with a tree. Okay, that's one would think or would believe that that tree is part of that dance. It may not be. because tree is also a symbol for a medicine man. That's what that is. So it really is not talking about anything else, only that animal or that person is a medicine man who put that there. And that's what that would mean. So you have to figure out what it is that made it that way. These people that use the panels to talk to the others had a reason for doing it that way. I'm going to go back again to my younger days to explain certain things, which is there, and why we do this. I will nigga pagavan manivichuk nigga. Koro mine abo how in a kaivan nigga or maniviro sami the nick kai nakatu nikan what I know. Okay. I don't think anyone understood that. Because it's language that I grew up with. Okay, you have different tribes. I would say at the time that the Europeans arrived here, probably about 500 different dialects in what is now North America. All different. And they don't understand each other. So, what made that where they have to understand each other was this, their hand. If I go like this, you understand what I'm doing. You're going to get up and you're going to come to me. It's simple. When I go like that, it means stay. So when I then take my hand like this and went like that, that means sit down. So everybody sits down. So all the Native Americans learned a technique as to how to get along with each other, how to communicate with each other. It was not necessary to understand the language, as long as you know what the hand is doing. Like the word for you is this. Like if I meet a stranger, the stranger would go like that. And I would go like this and point to a red. That means you. See, what do they call you? Call you. What tribe are you? And that was part of that. And same way, they would have their answer for their tribe. Like Shoshones were kind of like the snakes. So if I say, what do I call you? They would go like that. Right now I'd know that they're Shoshones. That's sign language. And sign language, the way that I'm looking at it, actually may have started or arrived here from old Mexico or Central America, and eventually used by the western tribes of the United States. And all of these people were communicating with each other. That's how we traded, or we would pick up new ways of doing things. And it was like I meet someone and I'm going to use my hands to talk to that person, and they can tell me what is good to eat. All of that is going to be there. Okay. Now, we had a method where you keep track of winter. We say winter counts, like every summer a certain thing happens. So we put that on a hide. We paint that certain event that happened. And then that's going to be the object that tells us what happened that year. A lot of tribes use that. They kept track of what went on. Some of these symbols that I'm talking about that is used in that is on the rock art. One has to understand some of the signs in order to read a rock art. Like, for instance, here's a figure of a person. All it is a head and down, kind of like a box. That's a body and an arm. Okay. Right through the middle, there's a line. To you, it's just like it's just a line. But the trained eye, that is this. Because that line is being drawn by that hand. And it simply means hungry. That's what it means, hungry. So, if a line is up here, then they're full. So like, directions too was like that. Like, you see a trapezoid figure, then one little arm is sticking out. It's telling you something. It's pointing direction. Maybe two of them. And when you are up in the hills and you see a rock art, you see something, oh, there's something over here. Maybe it's a water hole. Okay. That's how they did that. Coming here, we see signs. These things that I'm talking about is not old. There's a sign over here before you get to the turn, and there's an arrow that goes like that. That means that road is turning this way, right? We have it here. Then there's a T like that. You're driving down the road, you know there's an intersection there. You come to that and you turn either left or right. You're using that today. And one would think that it's something of the past, but I think it's here.
Here's the bear dance.
Oh, bear dance?
See the sign language?
Okay.
There's the bear's front paw and back paw, okay? This little line in sign language means to hold their shoulder like that. But this little line means to move back and forth. That's how you say it in sign language, like a snake. But it's attached here and it's attached here. So they're talking about moving forward and backwards, but staying in one place, backward-forward dance. And then you've got all the people lined up, you know, for a long time until they fall apart and the dance is over.
So I guess symbols are there to stay. But there's a difference too. We're going to talk about that a little. The earlier was the Fremont. We have Fremont sites. Then we have Ute. And but they are about the same. When you are studying that, and you're going to find that the Fremont people were using the same language system. And it's a matter of kind of like it's, you have to slow down a little bit. And an upside down figure is always dead. It's dead. A man upside down is dead. There's people buried there. Like if you see a petroglyph, a body upside down means there's something buried there. And that's what that means. And there's few places where there's, I would consider it to be sacred. You have to be careful. My mother always would tell us, don't bother anything. At a rock art site, or wherever there's the remains of the people of the past, you don't bother that. Because in our way of looking at it, the spirit doesn't die. It's still alive, so I have to be careful not to disturb that, because they're still here. And if I want to do something, I have to let them know that I'm going to do something. And that's what they meant. So bear dance is really a sacred dance in one way, yet it's a social dance where people just come and enjoy themselves. So that is our bear dance. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'm going to turn this back over to Carol. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions? Yes.
Yes, Clifford, you said that your mom her family came from this area? The Yampa?
Your mother came from this area?
Actually, it was my grandfather's. My
On your
grandfather.
mom's side?
Yeah, on my mother's side.
Yes.
We are always enrolled on our mother's side. So if my mother is enrolled on a reservation as a Yampa Ute, Yampatika Ute, all her children is Yampatikas. So I'm a Yampatika. But my father was an Uncompahgre in Uncompahgre, and they were further south. Both of my grandfather and my grandmother on my mother's side were from here. And my mother talked about Kuyawatinakavich. It says Kuyawatinakavich is your home. That's the name of a mountain here. So when I come back here, I say I'm home again, because my mother told me that. It's here. So this is where they come from.
Is there stories about the family, your people, your mother's people, using the hot springs here?
Are there any stories about using the hot springs here?
Yeah, I think it was considered to be a cleansing. Like removing bad spirit. It depended on the person that's doing this shamanistic work. Like a person could use that to clean a person off. That's how they use that. And also drinking that. You got to drink some of that, and that clean inside of your body. That's how they used it.
Is there any rock art right here in this immediate area, right here?
Is there any rock art around here?
There's a little town here south of here. And north of there, there was some jagged rocks sticking out of the ground. I went there one time, and there were some pictographs on that side there. And another place which had a pictograph, and I know it's not there anymore, was over here on that road that goes down to the shortcut. There's a coal mine out there. Walnut Creek, on that road. There was some work to expand the operation, coal mining operation. That was down underneath the ground. And it went right under that, those rocks that displayed bear dance. And before that happened, I was there. And it showed a row of dancers. The archaeologist that was there with me labeled that the Red Army. And I told him that that's not army, that's bear dance. It was here, so they were close.
Thank you.
It's one more.
There's some pictographs on 40 right by Mount Harris. They're rather faded and they're in red. Is he familiar with those? Right on the road?
I don't. You know of any around Mount Terrace?
Harris.
Harris?
Harris.
Mount Harris?
40.
We can talk about it later. If you have pictures of it, I'm sure you
On
can.
Harris.
I don't know where that is.
I don't know.
All right, well, thank you very much.